I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet and our other nonprofit stations where we air, wherever and whenever you are. Thanks so much for listening. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my jocular co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, together Rebecca and I are going to bring you an excellent hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology, the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your family, and the fish in the stream and the birds in the air and the worms in the ground, because all of us, like it or not, are wrapped up together on this tiny but beautiful little planet called Earth. And we have a unusually excellent show for you today, because we got a ton of material today, more than we're probably going to be able to get through. I got a couple things to talk about in our little introduction here. Then we will be interviewing Dr. Gerard Nadeau from Bowling Green State University. He is an architect, and he's going to talk to us about sustainable building procedures. And then we'll hear from our wonderful advertisers and patrons, to whom we are eternally grateful. And then Rebecca, what will you be talking about this week?
I have a segment called Fire Ants. Some like it hot.
Yes, and I actually asked Rebecca to talk about that topic today, because I'm actually traveling, and you know how when you travel you like to get new experiences. Well, I got one of those last night.
That's not one of the ones you wanted, is it?
No, I wasn't really looking for it, but I got my very first
There's not
fire.
such a thing as fire ants tourism. There isn't, like, it's not like, mountain gorillas or something.
Right. Yeah, and I can see why, but yeah, I got my very first fire ant bite last night. So, all right, then after we hear from Rebecca, we've got a lot of ecological news to share with you. As I said, probably more than we're going to be able to get through today, but that will be our show. So, first off, as I said, I am traveling. I'm on this grand tour of the East Coast. I started in DC and went down to Atlanta and Savannah, and now I'm actually in Florida. I'm in St. Augustine, Florida. And on this trip, probably more than any other trip I've been on so far, I got really hit by the fact that there's just so many cars, because more than once, like coming out of DC, coming out of Atlanta, we ran into these huge traffic jams on these 10-lane superhighways where everyone was stopped, and just, as far as the eye could see, forward and back in both directions, tens of thousands of cars just sitting there idling, putting carbon into the air. And I've noticed there's a few more electric and plug-in hybrid cars now in the mix. It's still a tiny minority, But they are starting to have an effect. And one way I know this is that the Ohio Department of Transportation is doing this survey on Facebook because they're all worried because as people buy more plug-in hybrids and electric cars, they buy less gas, and a big chunk of Ohio ODOT's budget comes from gas taxes. So they're taking surveys on what people think is the best way to increase their revenue. But they included some graphs and some information that I found really interesting in this survey. One is that it turns out that people who have plug-in hybrids, like myself and my Wonder van, the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid, and full EVs like Teslas, in Ohio, we actually pay more than most people with gas cars because we have to pay an additional penalty when we register our cars directly to the state of Ohio. And it turns out that unless you've got a real gas guzzler, and by gas guzzler we mean less than 10 up to 20 miles per gallon, you don't pay as much in your gas taxes as we pay in our penalty. And in terms of plug-in hybrids, penalty plus gas taxes. So we are actually us electric vehicle owners right now are kind of subsidizing most of the people who are driving just in regular old internal combustion engine cars, with the exception, as I said, of the people who have real gas guzzlers. And, this seems kind of backwards to me. And I'm not just speaking as a EV owner. I'm thinking if we really want to encourage people to switch over to non-carbon means of transportation, where we should be putting those penalties is on the gas guzzlers. I think they should pay an extra, couple $100 when they register their cars. And now the ODOT thing, right in there, they say, oh, we don't want to do that because a lot of people who are poorer have cars that get really bad gas mileage. But on the other hand, those people are getting penalized, but they're just paying their penalty to the gas companies because, as we've reported before, it costs about twice as much to maintain and fuel a car like that than it does even a plug-in hybrid like mine. So they're already paying the penalty. They're just paying it to Exxon and Mobil as opposed to the state of Ohio. So just one other point on that whole survey and the whole transportation thing. In Ohio anyway, only about 2.5% of automobiles are electric or plug-in hybrids. So, we need to go way more than that. And Ohio is projecting that we will, but they also included a graph of the sales tax, the gas sales tax, which means how much gas has been sold. And as you might predict, there was a huge drop, or a big drop, at the start of the pandemic when nobody was driving. That has not recovered. So even though EVs and plug-in hybrids are now only 2.5%, shaving that 2.5% off means that Ohio is putting less carbon in the air from gasoline and transportation. Even though it's going about it backwards, even though they're doing their best to penalize the people that are doing that, even switching to 2.5% from before the pandemic, it was like about 1%. That much is still changing the amount of CO2. So there is hope.
So this is clearly not actually about needing to make up the money lost to electric cars, because there aren't enough electric cars to make a substantial difference and float everybody else, right?
At this point, no. And at the rate they're being adopted, it would take many years before that became a substantial problem.
It's less practical than purely punitive, is what you're saying.
It seems that way. As a plug-in hybrid owner, emotionally, it's hard to say that the fact that you're penalizing me more for my registration than you're charging most people with cars in their gas taxes seems to me that there's a little bit of penalizing going on there.
Yeah.
Just a scotch. Yeah.
All right, a couple more quick things. Well, actually, I don't have time to get into all of it, but I will talk about one of them. One of the stops we've made on this grand East Coast tour here, we stopped in Atlanta. And we've reported before about the huge controversy there where there's a forest that the city of Atlanta wants to cut down about half of it and turn it into what's called Cop City, which is a pretend city with buildings and apartments where police can run around and pretend to shoot people. And they want to build an airport, private airport for a movie studio that's there in those woods. So we stopped there and went to try to interview some protesters there who've been living in the woods since 2021. Unfortunately, we didn't find anybody. We literally hiked all through the woods. We found the camp. We found where they'd been staying, but it was clear that it had been abandoned for probably about a week. There were sleeping bags laid out in the grounds. There were camping equipment just laying there. All the tents were down. But it was really sad. I took a bunch of pictures as we went through the encampment, and they had banners and signs everywhere. Like one said, "Forest defense is self-defense." I like that one. "Our woods, not Hollywoods," which is clever because half of this destruction is for a movie studio. There was also a little shrine to the fella called Tortuguita, the fellow who was unfortunately killed by police back on January 8th. He was shot 13 times. There's a little shrine there with candles and things. And one thing we found that was really cool, we found a oak tree that looks to be, I would estimate, between 200 and 300 years old. It was a huge oak tree. And somebody put a sign in front of it saying, "Trees for Mayor." I kind of like that one. But the saddest thing, the most poignant thing for me is just a little over a week ago, Roy Wood Jr. from The Daily Show actually went into these same woods in the same place and interviewed some protesters that were there. And after he did that, the Atlanta police, oh, and by the way, surrounding this park, that we counted 20 police cars. It was like every other driveway had a police car sitting in it. And the Atlanta police did a huge raid and arrested a whole bunch of these protesters. And as we've been reporting, they get charged with terrorism, of all things. And so I knew I was in exactly the same place that just a week before a national figure, Roy Wood Jr., had been interviewing protesters. And I found no one. But I did find the tracks in the woods where the police vehicles had driven into the woods to go arrest people. And I got pictures, and if you're interested in some of the images we got, check out our YouTube version after this show, or after we get that up. That'll probably be up Monday or Tuesday. So that's I'm still traveling. I won't be back in Ohio probably till next week sometime, but I've been having a lot of eco experiences, and I'm just happy to share them with you. So now, one thing that is happening up down here in the South, especially in North Carolina and Georgia, is that a lot of trees are being cut down for the pellet industry, the electric pellet industry. They cut down the trees, they grind them up into little pellets, and then they ship those over to Europe, 7 million metric tons a year as of 2021. And there's been a huge jump in 2022 because, as you know, probably Europe since they've lost their gas supply from Russia, they're bumping up all their other electricity sources. And so millions of acres are getting just clear cut every year, being turned into fuel for European electric plants. And this made me think about the whole idea of sustainability, because clearly that's not sustainable. I mean, clearly, if you're cutting down forests and turning them from carbon sinks into carbon sources for the next 30 years, plus putting all the carbon the trees save themselves, putting that right back into the atmosphere because you're burning them for fuel, that's not sustainable. And it's a good time for us to remember that being sustainable, achieving the green future, isn't actually that difficult. But what we have to do is do it intentionally and plan for it. And when we do stuff like make buildings, We just have to make sure those buildings are sustainable. And that's why I contacted Gerard Nadeau from Bowling Green State University, and he's going to tell us right now in a little interview all about how that's done. So, Josh, I say go ahead and run that interview. Welcome to For a Green Future. Could you just share with us your name and your position?
Yes, Joe. My name is Gerard Nadeau, and I am an assistant professor at Bowling Green State University in the Department of Architecture and Environmental Design.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show. And what I was kind of hoping to do was to get an idea from you just how big is the issue of environmental design in the architecture world today. Are a lot of people paying attention to it? Is it a sort of the next big thing or a big thing, or how would you characterize it?
It's huge. It's huge. So you don't always see the impacts, but two things are kind of going on concurrently in the United States. One is driven by the American Institute of Architects, and it has to do with the net zero challenge. So there's a big push to move design and construction to net zero and decarbonization. So that's been one of the goals of the AIA for quite some time. The major vehicle for doing that, of course, has been LEED certification. But there are costs and effort involved with LEED.
Yeah, remind us what LEED means.
LEED is, leadership in environmental and energy design.
Okay.
So I believe that's right.
Yeah,
so,
sounds right. LEED.
Yeah, LEED. And what it is, it's a process that relies on, one, benchmarks for energy consumption, and two, just steps that designers and builders can take, and owners, of course, because owners are what really drive the accomplishment of LEED certification. And it's a point system that if you achieve a certain number of points, you can get different levels of certification. And LEED is very much a kind of broad scope approach to architecture and environmental design. So, right now there's an increasing emphasis on carbon dioxide production in the construction industry, but LEED also thinks about interior air quality, just general health, impacts on the landscape, for instance, impacts on water, and air quality, besides CO2 production. So LEED has been a amazing way forward, and without LEED, which was developed by the Green Building Council to address issues of climate change, environmental degradation, we wouldn't have made some of the amazing progress that we've already achieved. So we've gone from LEED though to the 2030 challenge, which is an attempt to get all new construction to net zero by the year 2030, which is only seven years away, and it does seem that we're going to fall short on that. One of the challenges of LEED is that there hasn't been as much buy-in as we would like. So most owners, most projects do not strive for LEED certification, but the strategies that one would use to approach LEED certification are well incorporated into most design practices, but not all of them.
So could you give me an example of that?
Yeah, several examples would be using. So this is a kind of real easy one. Using native or adaptable plants in your landscaping for a building. Different strategies for capturing rainwater and releasing it slowly into the environment. Greater attention paid to building orientation, the type of glass that you use on the building, to reduce solar gain. More efficient mechanical systems for your project. Reductions in water use. For instance, we're all aware now that, we have these low flush toilets, 1.8, gallons per minute type of things, or you have sensors on plumbing fixtures, in public bathrooms where the water will only flow for a limited amount of time. We have control systems that turn lights off and on in a room, depending on who's in the room. If the room's empty, the light and there's no motion, the lights will shut off. We have LED lighting, those types of things. So one can say that LEED really helped drive some of those changes. But one thing that LEED wasn't putting enough emphasis on was the reduction of carbon dioxide released into the environment by buildings and the construction process. So currently, buildings globally probably emit, or processes related to inhabiting buildings release, between 30 and 40% of the carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere. And the built environment is one of the drivers of climate change as a result. So the 2030 challenge and the AIA 2030 commitment are really trying to create mechanisms and make it easier for a design and construction team and owners of buildings to approach that net zero threshold, and to totally take buildings out of the equation for climate change. So that's a big goal. And because of LEED, we've already peaked in terms of energy consumption per square foot for buildings, energy use intensity. So it's been about 10 or 15 years since EUIs have increased for new construction. So we've kind of flatlined. We're actually decreasing the amount of energy that buildings use through all of those strategies that are associated with LEED. But, there's now a kind of push to get it lower, as I was saying, because, impacts of climate change are going to have huge effects on our built environment, particularly some of our most beloved cities, coastal cities, Boston, Miami, Houston. There's so many places in the world, just in the United States, that are really seeing the future. It's not looking good for a lot of these communities.
Well, what would you say the potential for incorporating these environmental concepts when you design new buildings? What would be the what is the potential in terms of meeting that goal of net zero carbon, or maybe even negative carbon?
It's huge right now. So the primary thing that we need to do is utilize renewable energy in our homes, in our offices, in our factories. So we're making great, especially with the bills passed by Congress during the Biden administration. We finally have some real teeth, or claws to go after some of these goals. It's quite encouraging, but we've known for decades the AIA, I know this guy Mike Davis, who's been saying this for decades in the AIA, that our big problem right now is the kind of disjointed nature of our utility system in our electrical grid. So there's this idea that, for instance, the Midwest, from Texas all the way up to the Canadian border, is our Saudi Arabia in terms of energy. We have so much wind energy available to us, and we're really doing a great job tapping into that. Solar energy, we're doing a great job tapping into that. The challenge now is getting that renewable energy to the cities where we have high energy consumption. And, there's a problem with local utilities having the capacity to move that energy around, to move it between states, from the Midwest to the coast is basically what we have to do.
Well, I would say that we're that in some places we're doing an excellent job, but you may not be aware that some counties in Ohio have actually outlawed wind and solar development.
What?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
In fact,
so I'm very excited living in Bowling Green, for instance, because I have the option of checking a box on my utility bill so that my share of energy usage comes entirely from renewables, in Wood County, and that's very exciting. So another thing that you can do that has a big impact is a moderate impact, I should say, is you can switch to heat pumps from using natural gas for your hot water, and
so if you
in both heating and cooling your house.
Yes.
And if you can purchase from a renewable resource like the way you can in Wood County, that counts a lot.
So
of course,
if you integrate something like a heat pump into the design of a new building, how much does that limit sort of your architectural creativity, or does it not really? Or can you pretty much do anything you want and stay net zero?
It doesn't at all. It doesn't at all. So another thing that's occurred with this push to net zero is this big reliance on energy modeling in design. So this is maybe where architecture schools are lagging a little bit, but it has to do with just modeling the energy intensity of your building. And so that's something I'm very involved in at the architecture department at BGUSU right now. The reason, there are several reasons for that, but what's very interesting about this increasing emphasis on modeling is that energy reductions in the 90s, for instance, well into the 21st century, were associated with high-tech solutions. But with the increasing use of energy modeling and design, what architects have realized is you can achieve 50% of your energy reductions and your carbon dioxide reductions by using passive design and traditional methods of designing buildings. So we have at our disposal, at no extra cost really to anybody, the traditional design tools of architecture to design buildings that use less energy. That has to do with insulation in walls, window placement, building orientation, the types of specifications that you use. And, I've worked with developers, and developers are not, interested in incremental cost increases to deliver a project. And in part because they're not in the game to realize the tremendous savings during the operation of the building. But as a homeowner, if you're interested in holding onto your house for a decade or two, you will realize cost savings. So with heat pump, for instance, there are actual government subsidies, and often utilities will provide subsidies, the electrical utilities, to you for switching your heating over to a heat pump to kind of take off some of that that initial sting of the cost. But yeah, it's kind of amazing. You can get 50% of just doing a well-considered building using traditional building methods and not technology. And then the idea there is that if you're doing that, you will dramatically reduce the energy needs so that the amount of electricity that you need is not as great as it would have been in the past. And you can buy smaller mechanical systems.
Cool.
Or install smaller mechanical systems, which is an additional cost savings. Often those systems are more efficient, so you save money over time. So there's an accrual of benefits.
So if you if you orient your building and design the windows and so forth so that you don't need as much heating and cooling, that actually can cause savings because you don't need to buy as big of a HVAC system.
Yeah, exactly. And for certain types of buildings, you can save money too because you don't need as much space for the HVAC ducts, for instance, which allows you to shrink your floor-to-floor height, which decreases the volume of air that you have to heat and cool. But it also means an owner can get a 7-story building for the cost of a 5-story building, by just making those decisions.
Okay, cool. Well, we're just about out of time, sadly.
Okay.
Anything you want to add, or anything we haven't mentioned yet?
Retrofits are a bit of a challenge, and that's where heat pumps, come in especially handy. New construction, it's easier to bring those costs down. But, there are things that you can do in your home. You can have high-efficiency fixtures, for instance. You can just make sure that you have enough insulation in your attic if the attic space is available. That's a big one. Insulation under your floors if you have a crawl space or a basement. There's plenty that you can do to reduce your carbon footprint and energy costs.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Gerard. And if you could.
Yep, and thank you, folks, for listening. I like to do interviews like this one because it really points out the fact that we are shifting. We are making some of the changes necessary to survive this whole global warming crisis. The whole question is, are we doing it fast enough? And it's not looking good at the moment, but we are, we should not give up. We got to try harder. If you're behind, this is a sports channel, and if your team is down, you don't just back off, or you don't just keep going at the level you were going. If you actually want to win when your team is down, you have to crank it up. And so it's good to hear that the architects of the country in that architectural association there are setting the goal high, trying to get us to negative or net zero in our new buildings. So that brings us to the part of the show where we thank our advertisers and patrons. Hooray! For Green Futures brought to you by the Ecofill Shop. Ecofill Shop is located at 115 West Mary in Bowling Green, Ohio. They sell lots of different things: cosmetics, bath and body, home and garden, cleaning, towels, knickknacks, candles, fragrances, and more. They sell all these things without plastic containers because the whole purpose of the Ecofill Shop is to eliminate plastic. Customers love them, and one testimonial you might find on their website would be from Corrine, and she says, "One of my favorite products, the dish soap," with 3 exclamation points. "I like to drink red wine out of my tumblers, and I can't believe how easy the stains come out and leave the tumblers feeling and smelling visibly clean. Greasy pans are also no match for the dish soap. Dirty lasagna pan, no problem. I don't trust my dishwasher anymore. 100% would recommend." And that was by Corrine. And I'm a customer too. I use their shaving soap and some of their other products. They work great. If you're interested, give them a call at 419-944-8862. That's 419-944-8862, and talk to the owner, Jossie. And Jossie's very passionate about the environmental issues, all sorts of environmental issues. Oh, and you can also check out their website, of course, ecofillshop.com. That's ECOFILLSHOP.com. Or better yet, just drop by at 115 West Marion Bowling Green. That's the Ecofill Shop. And For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there are several ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. You can also go to their website, which is wcparks.org. And you can search for them on social media, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Just search for WC Parks, and then you'll find them and see what they're up to. So those are our advertisers. And For Green Future is also brought to you by our patrons. And our patrons are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. They searched for a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. They chose a membership that matches their budget. A little monthly fee comes out of their account every month and comes over to us. And that's how we can afford to bring you this wonderful program, which is sort of unmatched in the whole Northwest Ohio area. So we're very happy about that. And we're very happy to have Rebecca on hand to tell us interesting things about the world. And Rebecca, what are we talking about this week?
We are talking about fire ants.
Fire
which
ants. Okay, let's go.
Are just, they make a barrel of mandrill baboons look like a day at the spa. Seriously. They are not good at all. Fire ants are basically, we're talking about several species within the genus Solenopsis, which has 200 species, but only a couple are stingy, as one might say. They're called things like the stingy species are usually called things like ginger ants, tropical fire ants, stuff that sounds like what they are, basically. There are also some they go by the name red ants, but that includes some species in other genuses. Another off genus, sometimes people call weaver ants. Which are a completely other genus fire ants, but they're technically speaking not. You can distinguish fire ants by their copper head and thorax and darker abdomen. Although, I would just, if you see a very large group of ants swarming at you, I'd maybe move out of the way and not, look at them a lot.
Not wait till you see the dark of their abdomen, right?
At that point, you'll probably be able to tell because they'll be biting you. But they're about 2 to 6 millimeters, so as one would expect from ants, they are small. The problem with fire ants is not their size. The problem is their numbers, basically. Their unique physical features which make them fire ants, which nobody else has, no other ants, are they have something called a pedicel, a propodium, and a 10-segmented antenna with a club. I don't know how all these things work together, but that's what makes them stingy, apparently. That's what they use. There are several other species not in genus that can bite, sting, or spray formic acid also. So, just because something's stinging you, it might not be a fire ant, but, if it's eating small fawns, yes. Their sting is unique because it kills living tissue. And by this, they're able to eat like small baby animals like fawns and birds. And I would imagine, okay, if a human has learned how to go to the potty by itself, it probably can also get a large amount of fire ants off of itself fast enough not to actually die. But people smaller than that, it might be trouble. They also like to form acres of crisscrossing tunnels underground, which it might be sort of a nightmare to try and get with insecticide, as you can imagine. A lot of this information comes from, there's an article in Wired from 1 to January 2nd, 2019, by somebody named Ellen Earhart, which was really interesting. They are huge fans of global warming, the fire ants. And some of the reasons for this are that, A, it kills off other species and they can come in and take over their niche. B, but you're like, oh, but B, they just like warm weather, period. But yeah, C, if you can, basically you'd think, okay, Becca, but we're going to be fine because, global warming is going to come with a lot of floods and hurricanes and stuff, so they'll get drowned, right? Wrong. Because fire ants can form rafts. Imagine for a second that your house has been washed away and you're like, trying to cling to your pet's family members and property while floating around in some undifferentiated water, which might kill you soon. And oh, here comes a giant raft of fire ants to add to your trouble. Wow, really unfun. So yeah, insects as a whole have declined 70% in biomass between 1989 and 2017. Butterflies went from 107 species to 71 between 1840 and 2013. The majority of invertebrate species have decreased by half by 2019, according to one study. But not to worry, we'll always have fire ants. They will move right in there, and you can't have birds, bees, and butterflies anymore, but lots of lovely, lovely fire ants. And they love sprinkler systems and irrigation canals, so they like to live near humans. Isn't that great? Because, they like water, so, they just kind of, follow these things where there's water. Really most distressing, though, they're a symptom of something called, apparently, biotic homogenization, which is basically an outcome of less diversity and fewer evolutionary strategies available for species to succeed at. Leading over time to weaker ecosystems and more extinctions. Because basically, when you have fewer different types of animals, you tend to think, oh, we don't need all this. Okay, why nature? Why did you make this one bee that needs this very specific plant, which there's 8 of on Earth to survive, which only grows in this one teeny tiny area where somebody wants to build a hotel or something? Well, because that bee is doing something which it might at some point be required to do on a mass scale if conditions shift. Conditions, just like conditions have now shifted so that fire ants are needed to fill in the biomass of things that have been lost, that could happen for any particular given species. So it's good to have a lot of different weird species around doing different stuff, because you never know when conditions are going to shift. So we really, really, that is the thing that can survive. That is the good strategy, and somebody's already using it.
Right. Plus, it's just more interesting.
That too, yeah, a lot more fun and interesting. Originally these got started because they were hauled all over the ever-loving world on wooden shipping pallets, which we really like to use. They showed up in Alabama at first in the 1930s and 40s, but in 1973, this is really special. They a group of fire ants in 1973 in America was observed making mounds that are closer together with multiple fertile queens. They used to be, when they were in South America, they used to they could only do their mounds, their homes 40 meters apart, which was sort of a natural limit on their growth. But there are, most species have one queen, or they have multiple queens. They don't switch back or forth. Fire ants apparently are admirably flexible. If the one queen thing, if they got a lot of biomass they need to fill in and the one queen thing is too slow, they can just have multiple queens and just be like, okay, we're doing this other thing now. Multiple queen colonies are denser and more destructive to species around them because think it through. If you what is worse than a giant hive of fire ants? A lot of them.
Yeah, I was going to say 10
a lot more. Exponentially more. That makes it harder to poison because the poison has to reach all of the queens and behead them to kill the colony. 14 million people are strung per year. Some hospitalized. 1% are allergic, which is very bad news. In addition to the rising medical bills, they're projected to cause 6.7 billion annual dollars in damages to houses, power lines, and agriculture. They like to swarm in the shells of baby turtles that have just hatched. Ew! They're just very. I know, they're here for a reason and all, but they're hard to like. They seriously are. Some species of their prey animals are developing or adapting. Like there's a type of fence lizards that used to freeze when it was under attack, and now it's learned to bolt because fire ants. And I think it all kind of is summed up by a quote by a man named expert named Craig Allen, who said of fire ants, "It's a lesson in humility." That kind of sums it up. That's what they are. They will humble you, by gum.
Yeah, so I mean it's 75 right here right now down in Florida, and I know it's a lot colder up there, but the people who are thinking, oh, I wish Toledo was more like Florida, well, that comes with a cost. You don't have any fire ants up there, luckily.
Good, but yeah, I've lived in the South, and they've been giant slugs, ticks, out of control flea. You didn't have to have pets to have fleas down there. Snakes, it was like 3 or 4 years before when I moved to Ohio before I could walk through a field of tall grass again without constantly being terrified of ticks and snakes.
Right. All right. Well, thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for that report.
You're welcome.
And so now we go on to ecological news, and as I was predicting, we're not going to get through all of it this week, but just a couple important things. One, there's a podcast called Nuclear Hot Seat that we pay attention to. And on their February 14th episode, they had Joseph Mangano, who's an expert in radiation. And it turns out basically that the Japanese government is claiming that there was no increase in thyroid cancer from Fukushima. And Joe Mangano is saying that's impossible. dump a whole bunch of radioactive iodine into the environment and you're going to get an increase in thyroid cancer. So there's a nice article, nice interview on that date for her podcast. And it just brings up the idea, and he's basing this on the fact that in the Ukraine and in, after Chernobyl, it was well documented that thyroid cancer increased 200 times and near the Chernobyl. And in all of Ukraine, the whole country, it increased by 20 times. And so when you're faced with this question, when you're faced, for example, down in East Palestine, when you're faced with a government which is telling you there's no effect, there's, nothing is happening here, folks, go on about your business, you have to ask yourself, look, if we put radioactive iodine in the environment, how would thyroid cancers not increase? And it's the same with CO2. We've doubled the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. How could we not affect how much heat the atmosphere holds by doing that? So it's just, when the government is telling you something that really flies in the face of common sense, that is a sign that perhaps on this issue, the government is lying to you. So that was a good interview by Libby Halevi of Joseph Mangano on February 14th. And related to that, in Japan, they have something called the Nuclear Regulatory Authority, which is roughly equivalent to our Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC. And the Nuclear Regulatory Authority has said, look, after 40 years, we have to retire these nuke plants because they're getting old and everything's breaking. And unfortunately, just this past month, even though the Nuclear Regulatory Agency said no, the cabinet of the Prime Minister said, we can run nuclear plants essentially forever, no matter how old they are. And the way they get around this is they're adding into the time the plant exists, the times that it crashed and was offline. So, for example, after the huge earthquake in 2011, all the plants went offline for 2 years. Then Japan was actually a nuclear-free nation for about a year and a half. So they add that onto the lifespan of the nuke plant. It doesn't matter the fact that all the parts are corroding, continue to age even when their plant's not running. But by doing this cheat, they're able to keep every plant open for more than 70 years, which is just insane. Now, just a side note, and we're still looking into the details of this story. AOC, Alexandria Ortiz, went to Japan this past week and apparently got glad handled by the pro-nuclear handlers over there. Went on a tour of Fukushima and is now promoting the idea of recycling used fuel, which is just insane. And in fact, Britain just abandoned that, and Japan doesn't even do it now. But apparently, they were filling her head with this idea that you can recycle nuclear fuel, which is crazy, and we can go in more detail on that later. But it's looking like they're trying to recruit her into the ranks of the nuclear zombies. So let's hope they fail. Just a few more things. One, while I was down here, I like to look at local environmental issues. And in North Carolina, I found there's a bunch of people in Randolph County opposing a quarry. They've created an organization called Save Our Staley Committee. They're afraid that once a quarry gets going, that they're going to lose all their well water, that it'll affect the groundwater, and they're very justified in that. Chatham County, which is the county around Pittsburgh, they had a story in the Chatham News and Record on February 18th. County doubling up on protection efforts. They've created a advisory committee with 9 members that it's going to focus on. They're going to try to pick 20,000 acres to protect because the whole county is being massively developed. That is one thing about being down here, even around St. Augustine. There's clear cutting and construction everywhere. I mean, I can't believe how many rental units are right now under construction or right around me. Thousands and thousands of them. And I have to wonder, who are these people that are moving down south, even as it's becoming unbearable? But
Not be planning to live more than about 5 years.
maybe that's it. Maybe people are thinking we're only going to be around a little while. So, okay.
Well, it's a giant hospice at this point, Florida.
All right. So, last story I think we're going to be able to get to today, and that is that in the Narwhal, it was reported on February 23rd, Environment Minister calls for rare emergency order to save Canada's last spotted owls. Now, the headline uses the plural for owls. Unfortunately, even though Eco-Justice has been suing for 10 years to get this federal endangered species protection for the spotted owls of Canada, there's actually only one spotted owl left. Only one wild-born spotted owl left. There's supposedly 2 more that were raised in a box. So there's supposedly as many as 3 spotted owls in all of Canada. But
To play matchmaker.
yeah, but finally they
A love nest, literally.
yes. Well, and it's a question of if it's too late, because once you're down to 3, there's not a lot of genetic diversity in 3 owls. But they decided to finally act, and so they made headlines, and so the federal Canadian government's going to finally step in and try to save. They're going to set aside one patch of British Columbia of about 10 square miles and say, okay, finally there's no logging in this 10 square miles here at least. I guess they got down to few enough owls that they felt comfortable protecting the habitat for like 1 owl. As opposed to the British Columbia government, who we've reported before about their attacks on their old growth because that's the whole thing. Spotted owls need old growth forest, and that's what's being cut down the quickest over there in British Columbia. British Columbia's official policy towards old growth is crush, kill, and destroy. That's paraphrasing, obviously. But we've reported before about how the Wet'suwet'en have been trying to protect their forests, and there's been a lot of moves to try to protect the last of the old growth there, but the British Columbia government just keeps giving out permits for clear cutting, and as I say, they're down to 1 wild bourne. Now they do supposedly have another 30 that they're raising in boxes in a breeding center. So it's a question. It may be possible for them to come back, but might not. All right, well, I hear the music. Related story. In California, the California spotted owl was just declared an endangered species by the Fish and Wildlife Service. Our friends at Center for Biological Diversity reported that on February 22nd. But they gave a big loophole in what's called the 4D section of the law that will allow for logging exemptions. So we'll see how well you can protect an old growth species while still allowing old growth to be logged.
Unless we really feel like it.
Right. No longer.
Right. No logging unless, they ask nice or something. All right. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting.